We may remain unsatisfied with the answers so far, and understandably so. I mean, when we think of the worst kinds of suffering, it is difficult to apply some of the previous explanations. If we think of innocent Jews enduring the horror of the Holocaust in 1940s concentration camps, or if we think of the arbitrary murder of 7 million people in Pol Pot's killing fields, or hundreds of millions of people dying at the hands of Joseph Stalin in Soviet Russia, or someone having their head hacked off with a knife by an Islamic terrorist, many of the episodes so far may not quite satisfy our sense of injustice. Try telling victims of those events that their misery is merely making life more interesting or glorious, or that they're being refined and beautified through it, and it may sound more like a cruel taunt to them than a source of genuine comfort. But have you noticed something in common with all of these horrors? They were all caused by human beings, not by God. The Holocaust, the killing fields, Soviet communism, Islamic terror, none of them are God's doing. They're ours. I mean, not yours or mine, of course, but these are the works of human beings. These events are the direct results of man's inhumanity to man. God didn't initiate the Holocaust. That was Adolf Hitler and his Nazi regime. The Cambodian killing fields weren't God's doing either. That was Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. God didn't kill or starve hundreds of millions in communist Russia. That was the work of Lenin, Stalin, and their godless armies. And as for Islamic terrorists killing people on the street, it's not God who does those things either. Indeed, this is an undeniable fact that when you look across the span of world history and identify the worst atrocities and miseries that human beings have ever gone through, you tend to discover that the vast majority were caused by human beings and not by God whatsoever. The transatlantic slave trade, the French reign of terror, the tyranny in North Korea, the Rwandan genocide, wherever you look, the source is not God, but rather human beings. In fact, let's move away from the generational events for a moment, and let's think of the smaller pains that are more likely to touch our daily lives, or at least the kind of things we're more likely to hear about on the news every evening. So a hit and run accident, for example, that leaves someone paralyzed or perhaps even dead. Who did that? Is it God? No. It's a human being that's responsible for this. What about a mugging or a credit card fraud? Who burgles homes? Who puts toxic waste into rivers? Who steals your phone? Who deals drugs? Who devises scams? And who creates computer viruses to get access to your personal information? Who pickpockets you on holiday? Who breaks into your car? Who bribes? Who blackmails? Who pollutes the air? Who spreads malicious gossip about you in the workplace? Who bullied you at school? Who cheated on you when you were younger? Who injured you on the sports field? Who hurt you with a cruel taunt? Who ruined your day with a put down on social media? Does God do any of these things? Of course the answer is no. Human beings do all of these things. Those pains all touch upon our lives in this world simply because a human being decides that it's going to touch upon our lives in this world. Indeed, by far the most common reason for pain that you and I will ever experience in daily life is simply human maliciousness. God's simply not to blame for any of it. Indeed, let's get even more personal here, and let's turn the mirror on ourselves for a moment here. Because isn't it true that many of the worst pains that we experience actually weren't inflicted by others at all, but were merely the result of our own poor decisions and our own desire for sin? For example, if someone has smoked a packet of cigarettes every day of their life and now they have lung cancer, who's to blame for that? It isn't God, it's the smoker himself. What if someone takes drugs and destroys their life or their brain or they die? What if someone drinks excessively for years and gets liver disease? What if someone has casual sex and becomes infertile with disease? What if someone gambles all their money away and ends up in poverty? What if they jump into the sea without checking how deep that water is first? What if they go climbing in the mountains without wearing the right equipment or checking the weather first? Is God to blame for any of those tragedies? Though many people blame him in the moment, of course he's not responsible. It's all on us, it's all on the individual decision and our own poor choices. Look around at the problems of this world and make an honest assessment here about the situation. Isn't almost all of it caused by human beings? If not by people being malicious to each other, then by personal sin, corruption, evil ideologies, or even just pure negligence. And with that in mind, do we really have a right to rage against God for these pains? Again, the answer here is surely no. We could rage against Hitler for the Holocaust and we would be perfectly justified. We could rage against Pol Pot for the killing fields, again justified. We could rage against the burglar, the bully, the fraudster, the polluters, the negligent, the corrupt, again perfectly justified. We could even be angry with ourselves for making poor decisions in this life and we would be justified. But God is simply not to blame for most of the things that we lay at his door. Surely we should be humble enough to admit that and where appropriate take personal responsibility rather than trying to pin things on God for which he simply has no blame whatsoever. Now this is where people normally would say, yet God still made a world in which all these things are possible. And what kind of God would create a world where things like the Holocaust and the killing fields were even possible? Where men like Hitler and Pol Pot could even exist? What kind of God would create a world where other people could bully and defraud and lie and cheat and steal from each other in this way? And the answer is that he is simply a God who has decided that human beings should be given the dignity of free will. The moment that God decided that human beings should have free will to make their own choices in this life, the possibility of evil then logically had to open up. You see, if someone has free will, then they are by definition capable of using that free will, that freedom of choice, to choose either good or evil. If they're not free to choose evil, then they're not free at all. As soon as you give people genuine free will, genuine freedom to choose for themselves, you have to accept the possibility that some will choose evil. The possibility of evil must then logically exist in your universe. Now you may then well ask, well, if free will creates the possibility of evil, then why didn't God just create human beings without free will so that they could only do good? But then you'd be asking for a world without humans. You'd be asking for programmed computers, automated machines. Robots is what you'd be asking for. Mere objects who are programmed to behave in a certain way, like a laptop or a smartphone. Now, would a world of programmed robots who are not capable of making their own free will decisions be a world without evil and suffering? Yes, it would. But by taking away from people their freedom to choose evil, remember that in that same moment, you'd be taking away their freedom to choose good as well. You'd be taking away their ability to choose love, generosity, kindness, mercy, bravery, or indeed anything else that's good in this world. Therefore, a world without free will would be a world without evil and suffering on the one hand, but it would also be devoid of all of these good things as well on the other hand. Indeed, all these words would actually lose their meaning, because it's only in the fact that we're free to choose these things, that is to give or withhold these things, that they have any meaning or value whatsoever. I'll give this example, because I'm not sure if I'm making sense at the moment. So I'll give this example that will hopefully clear things up. That a man asks a woman to marry him is only meaningful because he had the free will not to ask. If he was programmed to ask her and he had no choice, and if she was programmed to accept and she had no choice, then we're not talking about love anymore. We're talking about a meaningless simulation. Similarly, it's only brave that a man saved a drowning dog from a river because he had the choice not to save the dog. If he was programmed to jump into that river, then we're not talking about bravery anymore. We're talking about a meaningless simulation. So you see the problem here, that if God took away the free will from humans that makes evil possible and then programmed us to behave in a certain way, then this whole world would be reduced to a meaningless simulation where none of our actions and words would really mean anything at all. Nothing would really matter and everything would become a futile waste of time. There'd be no point in running a simulation like that where we humans have no more intrinsic value than a laptop or a vending machine or a lamppost. It's our ability to choose that makes us human and that makes any of our words and actions and deeds meaningful. Now, clearly God has decided it would be better if his world was populated with beings that had free will and therefore people who had meaning. Clearly he's decided the risks are worth it, and I think that we would agree with him really. We want a meaningful life. And it's just a logical necessity that if we want all of those things that are meaningful, love, generosity, bravery, kindness, and all the rest, then for them to be possible, hate, evil, and selfishness, and greed, and all of those things must be possible too. This is only logical. And this explains the entire history of the world really, that some people will use their free will for good, some people will use their free will for evil. The realization that most of the pain in the world is caused by humans and therefore could be prevented by humans should cause us all to pause and reflect. Because if we're honest, haven't we all personally contributed to the pain in the world with our own free will choices. Okay, none of us have initiated a Holocaust or a killing fields or put whole nations under tyranny, but in our own small ways, haven't we each lied, stolen, treated each other poorly, been selfish, retaliated, said harsh things, broken a promise, been reckless, or just hurt another human being in our own way? Isn't it true that if we all watched our lives back on a big screen, there would be moments where we would all have to turn away in shame? Yeah. The same goes for me, the same goes for all of us. We have all contributed to the pain here in this world. The story is told that the Times of London in the early 1900s posed this question to its readers: what is wrong with the world today? And the well-known author G.K. Chesterton replied with a typically witty one-sentence essay. He said, "Dear sir, I am. Yours, G.K. Chesterton." He makes a very good point. Before pointing fingers at anyone else in this world, I must admit that I am part of the problem here. I am part of what causes pain in this world. The Bible tells us we have all inherited a sinful nature and we all have a proclivity for wrongdoing. And because of that predilection, we have all been responsible for bringing pain into this world in some way. Isn't it a bit hypocritical then for us who have caused the problem, at least in part, to shout at God for things that we have been responsible for? You know, God always advises that before we blame anyone else for the evil and pain in this world, we take a look at ourselves first, lest we become hypocrites. Jesus famously said, "Hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your own eye, then you'll see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye." The message being given here is that if we want to fix the world, the best and most immediate thing that most of us can do is start by fixing ourselves. Indeed, what chance do we have of commanding a whole fleet of ships if we can't even steer our own little boat? I think Jordan Peterson talked about this recently as well, saying something like, before trying to change the world, first tidy your bedroom. In other words, if you can't get your own house in order, then what makes you think that you could put the whole world in order? If we could all just fix ourselves individually here, then most of the problems that plague the world would disappear instantly. And even if we were the only ones to make this change, that would still be one less problem for the world to deal with. Now, having established that most of the pain in the world is caused by humans, that we could therefore prevent most of the pain in the world, and that the prevention should start with us at home, of course God wants us to be a positive influence on the world. He wants us to be salt and light. He wants us to be agents of change. Therefore, there's a sense in which while we shake our fists skyward and ask God, why do you allow so much pain and suffering in the world? He could ask us the exact same question. Why do we allow so much pain and suffering in the world? What are we doing to help in this situation? Since humans cause most of the problems in the world, it follows that humans can fix most of the problems in the world. So why aren't we? There's a risk of us wishing to treat God like some kind of cosmic butler here when we ask him to clean up or prevent things that we could clean up or prevent ourselves. I think honestly we often want to run around causing havoc, being selfish, living for ourselves, indulging in our sin, being reckless, and the world then obviously becomes a mess as a result. And instead of changing our ways, we just want God to come running up after us, cleaning up all of these messes that we've created so that we don't have to experience the painful consequences of all of our own actions. We're sexually immoral, and then we blame God for the heartache, the broken relationships, and the disease that then enters into the world. We're selfish, we live for ourselves, and then we blame God for the fact that there's poverty in the world. We lie, and then we lament the fact that there's deceit in the world. Even jumping into oceans without checking the depth of the water first, or getting lost and dying in the mountains, or smoking and getting lung cancer. We blame God for stuff like that too, strangely. We shout at him and tell him to make it all right again. Why won't you clean up after us, is what we say. Why don't you stop the bad things happening to us that happened as a result of our own free will choices? And God could firstly reply, why are you making the messes in the first place? Why are you shouting at me for things that you have caused with your own free will choices? Learn the ways of sanctification so that you make a better world without any of these messes. And secondly, he could reply, look, I am not going to confound your free will choices. Otherwise, I will devalue you and render your life meaningless. You'll become nothing more than a laptop. Your choices must have consequences for anything to really matter. Therefore, I will dignify you by making sure your choices do matter and they do have consequences. Instead, I have given you my word and my spirit so that you might make good choices, so that you might be spared pain, and so that knowing good from evil, you might be my agents of good in the world. Indeed, you are my solution to the injustice and the pain out there. You ask why I don't do something about all of these problems, but I did do something. I created you. I've empowered you through my word and my spirit to bring healing and hope into all the world. Now go and live a selfless life out there. Go and love people. Liberate captives. Give freely. Give your time. Give your money. Give your strength. Offer hope to those people. As he told the prophet Micah, do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. Why are you shouting at God about this? He has given you what you need to make a difference out there. He is not your butler. And to ask God to intervene and to save us from the consequences of our own free will choices is to ask for another kind of world. And as we saw earlier, it would be a world that has no meaning, where we have no intrinsic value or dignity, and where our choices don't really matter. Indeed, it would be a world where nothing really matters. It would just be a meaningless simulation. I was going to carry on here. In the book, there's a couple of extra points that I wanted to make, but I think this video is getting long enough now, so I'm just going to wrap it up here, I think. So essentially the bottom line for this video is that God won't remove our free will, because if he does, he would devalue us and life would become a meaningless simulation. But it's in giving us this free will that the possibility of evil then opens up. Logically, that just has to be the case. Now, most of the evil in the world comes from human beings using this free will to make bad choices, and therefore it's daft to shout at God about the mess that we are making ourselves. And indeed, rather than asking God to confound our free will or demanding that he come and clean up after us, we must instead learn to make better choices with our free will, to love justice and to love mercy. Now, God has empowered us to make these better choices with his word and through the power of his spirit. It's not his fault if we don't avail ourselves of these gifts.